Good morning, everyone. My name is Ewan Leach. I'm the Chief Executive of Surf Scotland's Regeneration Forum, and welcome to the third day of our annual conference on Partners in Place. The session is being recorded, so if you don't want to be seen, then keep your camera off. But if you want to be seen and you want our speakers to feel like they are being listened to and you can laugh at their jokes at the appropriate times, then feel free to keep your camera on as well. As I said, this is the third day. We've covered quite a lot in the past 2 days, from the government's policy on regeneration looking at over the next Parliament, the funding situation that is forthcoming, as well as the learning from the impact of COVID on community groups, and looking at the actual work at the front line of people who are working in places, and how that translates to influencing policy at a national level. We've had some interesting discussions. I think the first day was, there was a request for us to learn from failure better and be more honest about where we have had failures, something that everyone's more keen to hide often than not. And we've also heard from the funders that they are looking to change. They've already changed their ways of working, and are reviewing, some are in mid-review of how they deal with grant applications, and they're also looking at making sure that they can provide funding for core costs and for revenue, which we know is a constant call within the voluntary sector. But today our focus is on climate, and climate has occurred across the 3 days, the previous 2 days of the conference, but today we wanted to have a particular focus on it, and we had a focus on it last year, particularly around the issue of transport. But today we're kind of looking at it more generally, obviously in the run-up to COP26, which is receiving a lot of focus, but COP26 is just a point in time. But before we begin today, we thought we're going to have some polling questions later on in the morning, but we just wanted to trial some brief polling questions if you check that the polling system works. So if Chris, you could put the polling questions up, and we're just asking you where you are, which part of the country you're in, are you at home, are you back at work?
Remember to scroll down the questions. And
scroll down the questions, because the box that opens won't reveal them all until you scroll down, particularly when it gets to question 3, of which sector best represents you. Our participation rate is 79%. We got up to 91% previously. Any final people gonna fill in the poll? Yeah, we're at 94%. Okay, we beat Tuesday's record. We'll close it when it reaches a minute if you want to end the poll. And 84% of us are at home, which means that we're probably following the government's advice of continuing to work from home where we can. In terms of geographic spread, we have a spread mainly Glasgow in the west of Scotland, but we have representation from across the UK, across Scotland, and outside of Scotland as well. So that's good to see that we have an international audience. And the highest proportion of sector that's represented is community groups, charity or social enterprise, but we have representatives from all sectors: academia, housing associations, business, public sector at a national and local level, and we have individuals as well. So thank you very much for doing that. It gives you an idea of who's in the room, and you will have seen the attendee list as well. So you have an idea of who's in the room today. So as I was saying this morning, we have 3 speakers, and we have Fraser Stewart from the University of Strathclyde, Anika Kelly from the Carbon Co-op in Manchester, and we hope to have Sally Clough from Belville Community Garden. She has 1 or 2 technical issues in her office at present, so she's ducked out and hopes to come back in time for her talk this morning. And she's looking at being a participant in the Climate Beacon, the Inverclyde Climate Beacon specifically. But one of the reasons that we're looking at climate change today and the sort of tack that we're taking on it is, I suppose it goes back to one of the founding principles of SURF. So the second of the two founding principles are that the people who are the intended beneficiaries of any regeneration effort must be meaningfully involved in the process if it is to be successful in planning, implementation, and maintenance. I suppose maybe a shorthand way is that of when change is happening, making sure that the change is happening for the benefit of the people and that they have some control over that benefit as well. And I suppose quite a few of us have probably been involved in previous projects where change has happened, and a lot of the changes that happen around climate change in relation to deprivation seem to focus on the retrofit agenda. And the retrofit agenda is something that was number one on SURF's manifesto asked in the run-up to the election, along with more money on adaptation and a focus on green jobs for young people. But the retrofit is often about making poor people's homes warmer. And there's much more to it than that. There's much more benefits that can be drawn from that, and the element of control and the employment that can arise from the retrofit agenda for people who need work, and that there should be long-term careers in maintaining our built environment is something that we're maybe not yet exploiting quite enough. And it's for those of you who don't know, I'm the new chief executive at SURF. I've only been here 3 months. Many of you will be familiar with Andy. I'm not filling Andy's shoes. It's a different pair of shoes altogether, because no one can fill Andy's shoes. But this agenda around retrofit is one that I have a high interest. I come from a built environment background, and I thought this was an opportunity for us to begin exploring this a bit further. And I suppose as part of this, actually before I joined SURF, I came across Fraser Stewart, because Fraser was publishing immediate aspects of his work. So Fraser he's an applied researcher at the University of Strathclyde, making clean energy work against poverty and inequality. But Fraser began talking more about class and representation in climate spaces. He's also on the board of the Glasgow Community Energy. But it was that aspect of class within the climate discussion, and having spent the past few years going to lots of meetings and going to lots of institutes and hearing the accents of who's there and seeing the backgrounds of who's there, there is quite an obvious gap in this particular area. Fraser's written some interesting pieces on this, some interesting articles. He's been doing the rounds and talking at quite a lot of events, and we thought we would invite him to the event this morning. So he's from the Council of State in Forfar, and I'm now going to hand over to you, Fraser.
Thanks very much, Ewan, and cheers for having us as well. It sounds like the event's been brilliant so far. But yeah, hello, it's extremely nice to be here. As Ewan says, I have given sort of variations of this talk over the last few months, and it's always positive, it's always constructive. But there are sort of three caveats that I want to get out of the way before I get started with the main thing. The first thing is that I am a working class guy from a scheme in Forfar, the northeast of Scotland there. I am speaking only to my own experience, right? So within climate spaces, there are far more inequality as an issue around race, gender, geographically as well around the world. I'm speaking purely to my experience within Scotland and within the UK. I don't purport to speak to or over anyone else's experience. Second caveat is that everything I say, I promise I say it with love. If it sounds a little bit critical, if it sounds a little bit personal, it's not meant to. It's positive, it's constructive, and hopefully we can work after it. Third, final point is that I swear, I apologize in advance if that upsets anyone specifically, but I will likely accidentally or otherwise drop in a couple of little ones here and there. Sorry about that in advance. So we'll get into it now. So hello, yes, I'm Fraser. I'm an applied policy researcher at the University of Strathclyde, although, as Ewan says, I'm originally from various rough and ready housing estates in Forfar, just outside of Dundee. So my work looks at how can we bring the benefits of new low carbon innovations into low income, working class, marginalised households and communities, areas of deprivation. So basically, how can we make things like community energy work to bring money and jobs into those types of communities? How can we make solar panels or retrofit schemes like Ewan talked about work to reduce energy bills or improve quality of life for lower income families? How do we create a clean, expansive public or active transport network that doesn't just reduce emissions, but connects previously excluded people and communities to create new chances for leisure and employment. That sort of thing. You get the gist, right? Now, I love working in the low carbon energy climate space, and I am super, super fortunate to get to collaborate with some truly amazing visionary people and groups who care deeply about the future of the planet and the people who live here. Being completely honest though, right? See, while obviously I appreciate the urgency, the danger of the climate emergency, it's the single biggest issue that we face on the planet. Anyone who knows me outside of this will know that I talk about it endlessly as well. But I wouldn't actually consider myself like a climate guy. I'm a poverty guy. I'm an inequality guy. So climate for me isn't just this big scary thing that we have to fix, although obviously it's the fucking massive scary thing that we have to fix, but it's also a massive opportunity, right? So we're at a formative moment in human history where we're being forced to change how we do pretty much everything, right? Transport, housing, land industry, energy, economics, community organization, just about everything in between. Why not change those things in a way that actively addresses some of those historic social and economic issues, right? So why not make this formative moment, these new tools that we have at our disposal, work actively against poverty, against inequality, and against injustice? So that's what really gets me going, right? Making the biggest issue that we face on the planet today, the climate emergency, work actively against those historic intergenerational issues of poverty and inequality. And it's a genuine privilege to get to work on this stuff for a living, right? To help shape these big, exciting policies, as I'm sure lots of you in the audience just now can identify with as well, right? It's a rewarding space to work in. However, I can feel very, very out of place in these spaces sometimes, right? So I'm from a scheming Forfar. I grew up rough in pretty abject poverty, fighting all of the addiction, the violence, the mental health issues, all the stuff that goes with that, and that often lasts well beyond that upbringing as well. So safe to say, as I'm sure lots of you will know from this space, is there aren't many people in this field who come from that kind of background, right? We BAMs from places like Forfar don't often find themselves in the kind of highfalutin fields of climate and energy. And that's not exclusive to academia or research either. That's across policy, activism, industry, and media as well, in my experience, at least. So that can make me feel really out of place a lot of the time. I'll tell you, I've given keynote speeches at all kinds of conferences recently, things like this. Just last month, I was in a meeting talking about COP26 with the Scottish government. I've never felt imposter syndrome, like being a wee guy from Forfar, having to apologise to a government minister for using the word shitebag in a conversation about carbon offset. And I promise you that's a true story. So these spaces don't often feel like they're for me. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of you in the audience who have felt similarly throughout your careers at some point. The other side of this, of course, is that the more that you try to shoehorn yourself into those spaces, whether that's trying to clean up your accent to fit in, the more that you worry, or the more that I worry at least, that I've gotten above myself or forgotten where I've come from, right? So it's maddening, the dilemma. It's kind of back and forth, genuinely maddening. Anyway, that's me. So now, like we said before, this feeling is common for lots of people in academia and policy, but I do think that it can feel especially sharp in the sort of climate and the wider low carbon circles. And I think there's a big, obvious reason for that. I think the reason for that is that climate as a whole in Scotland and the UK has a pretty stark class issue. Now, I promise I say this with love, but the mainstream climate, low carbon sustainability work that happens in the UK is broadly dominated by very well-meaning, very middle class people and voices. And I think that's a problem. It's a problem for a couple of reasons, right? And it's not because of the middle class people. The first reason is that obviously the climate emergency isn't just happening to the middle classes, right? It affects everyone. It affects working class, low income, marginalized communities most acutely, particularly women, particularly people of color, and particularly people with disabilities. So understanding and representing those experiences in the climate space should be important to all of us for that reason alone. Following from that, though, the solutions that we design to combat the emergency, such as we're talking about today, won't just affect the middle classes either, right? From architecture to infrastructure and everything in between. If we want those solutions to be fair and equitable and even prosperous for everyone, then to realise the socioeconomic as well as the environmental potential, which is where I'm coming from, as Ewan spoke about earlier, then we need to do better to get everyone around the table into our policy design spaces, into our project management spaces, our community spaces, into more spaces in general. We cannot hope to fix or avoid creating inequalities and injustices from a distance. We can't represent perspectives of people and communities whose lives we haven't lived purely on our own terms. And this obviously speaks to a much bigger conversation about voice, about representation and justice in policy design. But again, it feels especially critical in a climate low carbon space that really will impact just about everyone and everything that we do. And that, in my experience, again, suffers pretty acutely from that lack of representation across the board. Achieving a net zero transition that is truly fair, that is even prosperous, means recognizing that different communities, different people, different social groups, different areas all have different needs and visions and capabilities, and that those communities are obviously, I'm sure you would all agree, best placed to represent that as far as possible. So what I think that we need to be doing is working harder everywhere to support people and communities to shape solutions that work best for them, rather than prescribing what we think will work best for them wherever we feasibly can. So this is the fundamental justification for needing more voices in this discussion as we go about our work in policy design, planning, project management, community organising, everything overall. We need to bring everyone along for the ride and get more people around the table as we design and implement our solutions to the climate emergency, because the emergency and the solutions that we design aren't just impacting the already converted middle classes who tend to dominate the discussion as it stands. The good news for all of us is that in reality, achieving this doesn't need to be all that difficult or time consuming. We already know where the issues and where the opportunities lie, and most of us can get started right away, right? So we can hire people with lived experience by treating that experience as a qualification in itself into our project and design roles. We can go even further to improve community engagement, so that happens on communities' terms rather than our own prescriptive terms. We can work better on communication and accessible language, especially on climate and carbon type stuff. And we can make space for people from different backgrounds, not just so that we can harvest their stories and thoughts and consult with people for the sake of ticking boxes, but to support people and provide a platform for them to lead and shape the work that we do. By doing this, I believe, we can create a transition that is truly, truly just, truly equitable, and even prosperous for as many people as possible moving forward. So this, bringing it back to the opening salvo, this is why I stay resilient and desperately cling to my accent, even when that imposter syndrome washes over. I know that that accent, my perspective, is important here. I know that the transition to net zero needs mine and a whole load of other perspectives in the mix, especially where communities and local solutions are concerned, if we're going to do it properly and in a way that not only leaves nobody behind, but in a way that truly works for everyone going forwards. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Fraser. That was superb, and I'm sure it was probably briefer than you've given other keynote speeches for, but you managed to cram a lot into that 10 minutes, and you said what I'd hoped that you would say. And I suppose some of the reason for the choices of our other speakers this morning are to look at actually the challenges of actually trying to do what you have raised, the things that we need to do. I have questions for Fraser. You may also have questions for Fraser. Feel free to put them in the chat box. But we'll, a little bit later in the morning at 11:45, we'll come back and we'll give all our speakers some questions for them to ponder together. So thank you again, Fraser. But we're now going to move on to Anika Kelly, who comes from the Carbon Co-op, and you can read about Anika's background in the biography that you've been sent. But Anika currently works in the Retrofit team and Energy Commons team of Carbon Co-op, and over the last 6 years she's worked to engage and organise training for householders and contractors around retrofit. Now, Anika comes from a similar, with a similar agenda to the one that Fraser's been talking about, And she's able to talk about how difficult it is to sort of stop the middle class monopolising the retrofit agenda. So Anika, over to you, and I'll let you share your presentation.
Thanks for the introduction, Ewan, and thanks for having me. And yeah, thanks, Fraser. Your whole talk's made my heart beat faster, and now I'm really nervous before mine. But yeah, hopefully I'll do justice to what we're doing, and what we are doing is trying to tackle some of those issues that you've raised. So yeah, I'm keen to talk about it and then hear your views. And we'll obviously learning and make mistakes along the way, but we're doing our best. So yeah, Ewan asked me to talk about tackling climate in the community. And just really quickly, I'll talk about Carbon Co-op. So yeah, we're based in Manchester. We're a member organisation. We've grown quite a lot over the last 4 or 5 years, and we've got various teams of people. So we've got a lot of expertise around retrofit and energy systems, but we sort of see the central importance of like citizen engagement and that being as just as possible and getting those voices that aren't often heard into sort of that kind of policy and local government environment, which is what the project I'm about to talk to you about is all about. So we were kind of looking at like how can we respond to the climate crisis and put communities at the heart of that? You know, how can we make sure that, you know, we are truly as representative and diverse as we can be as we do that, and what's our role as Carbon Co-op to support that to happen? You know, like how do we get, you know, it's very true that the environmental movement, I've known this since I was sort of, you know, for about 16 years, that, you know, the climate movement's very white and middle class, and, you know, that doesn't represent the reality, and also doesn't really represent, you know, the more acute impacts that those that are least represented will face in this. And I think we've seen this through the pandemic. So, you know, we were looking at what kind of spaces would work to engage people or create spaces that they feel comfortable to work in to talk about these sorts of things. And can legacy be built into that? So we developed a project, we got funding from ICLE, a German organization, and it's lasting over 2.5 years. We've created this little promo video about it. So I'm going to just show the video first because it will explain the project better than I will for about 3 minutes, and then I'll go into a bit more detail. Let me know if the sound isn't good.
All my friends are from this area. I've seen it develop, and I've been part of that regeneration process. I have got a vested interest in seeing this area prosper, but I think it's not just the economic benefit, but it's also well-being.
Local people will be involved in transforming energy usage in Shulver and Westwood through the programme. So we have 8 workshops which we're asking participants to attend. We'll also produce a local energy action plan from those workshops specific to Westwood and Shulver, taking into account that lived experience of people in the area. And finally, out of these workshops and discussions with local people, we'll be able to pull together a project which will be community owned and community led that's going to make a difference in those areas.
I brought my children up here. Over the years, it's changed a lot. When I first moved on to Belville, it was a sink estate, and I've watched it turned around. And there's an awful lot of good people on show who've had a bad press over the years. I'd love to say if we became greener, which we would, people would stop fly tipping, you know, sort of start taking more of an interest in their area.
I'd love to be able to see, when I look at some of the terrace houses that have been upgraded here during the renewal processes and things, I'd love to see all the houses with solar panels all over it.
It would help people if they had more affordable bills, because, you know, bills are expensive.
I'd also like to see a social enterprise being created by local people who would be advising their community on how to improve energy and save energy.
People who are interested in the area to look at the planning. It's got to be a whole thing, you know. Heating would be one step and one part of all that.
You know, in terms of the young people in the future, in terms of jobs and enterprise, it's all quite connected. So yeah, legacy, I'd like to see after the project's finished that there'll be something here. So something like a social enterprise would be great.
I do think we have responsibility to do things yourself. It's our area and it's for us to instigate changes, and we have to work with each other. Could bring the community together, and if you're bringing the community together, things improve, don't they?
So in fact, I think at the end of that film, we do have a website that we've just released, so I'll share that with you afterwards. So that gives you some of an idea of what the project's about, but I'll go into it in a bit more detail now. Start the video again, sorry. So our first step was to recruit local energy champions in Shelver and Westwood, which are two deprived areas in Oldham. And we picked them because they showed a mix of very different kinds of communities. Sort of in Westwood, there's more of a Bangladeshi community. In Shelver, it's more of a white community. And there's a sort of different rural and urban mix. And to do this, we employed, you saw in the video, Carly, who's, you know, an engagement officer from Oldham, knows the community really well. And she worked with community leaders and community organisations in Oldham to recruit 12 champions for each area. And we wanted to reflect the neighbourhoods as much as we could in terms of wealth, gender, ethnicity, the different types of housing. So we tried to reflect in the 12 champions to have as much of a representative mix of the people that lived in that area. We wanted to make sure that people who don't usually have an influence over sort of the local policy would be in the room. And also these weren't people that aren't already interested in the environment necessarily either. Because we were really valuing in the programme their expertise in terms of the local expertise they have, and also understanding their experience of energy in the research process of the workshops, we were remunerating them for their time to attend the 8 workshops. They're all a day long each, over 6 months, which is quite a lot of time for them to give up. So, you know, we didn't want to rely on volunteerism because, you know, this often excludes those that have less wealth to being involved in these kinds of processes. And that's all at the living wage. So we recruited champions this summer. Our second step was so we really wanted to make sure that we could equip people with as much expertise as well as learning from their expertise. And a part of this is creating a data dashboard. So this is really to use local data to strengthen the process, understand the energy infrastructure that's there at the moment. So looking at things like EPCs, solar potentials on roof, sort of health issues, income, tenure, sort of where the kind of, you know, to identify areas in which there might be lots of people in fuel poverty, or where there might be lots of opportunities for community projects in terms of solar. So that's ongoing at the moment. Our next step, which we're also in the middle of, is 8 full-day workshops over a period of 6 months to work with people, to support them to understand the issue, imagine what could be different, and develop their own plans. So all of these workshops are in community venues that, you know, that people know about and are familiar with. The way we're facilitating them is to really support people to share their knowledge and expertise and build confidence in that, and also share our knowledge and expertise around things like retrofit, renewable energies, and sort of transport. There are 3 stages in this. So the first 2 workshops were around sort of diagnosing the problem, understanding their experiences of energy, sort of talking more about retrofit and renewables. And then the next 3 workshops that will be coming to this autumn are all around the dreaming phase, so kind of imagining what they think, how they think they could, you know, what could we do in their communities, what could they do in their communities to change this. And then the third stage is to really define this and create local action plans. Just to say also, Oldham Council are really supportive of the project. They're one of our partners. We're working with many partners around this. So in this section, we're working with Urbed, and these local action plans will be tied into sort of what the local authority are working on. And we're looking at 3 scales, so the home, the neighbourhood and the borough. Over these workshops, as ideas come up, we're sort of collecting those ideas for projects or ideas for things that people would like to see differently or like to see done in the area around this issue. And as through the workshops, we're collecting the ideas, and then we'll work with them to sort of define these ideas and then pick a few projects. And then we have some funding to support, seed funding to support 3 projects, and they'll be gaining sort of mentors, so that each project will have a mentor through the next year, some more sort of consultancy expertise, and we'll support them to find funding so that there's a real legacy after this project ends for things that they want their response to the climate crisis and how that can bring benefits to their communities can be really sort of created and long lasting in their communities. And we want to share our learning as we go through this with others in local authorities or community groups and housing associations. So we've got Claire's on board here and a researcher from UCL who are sort of taking part in sort of the workshops through the process, and also talking with us about what's going well, what isn't, how does it working, to be able to create a toolkit at the end of the project so that we can share our learning. So that's Oldham Energy Futures. I just really wanted to very quickly talk about this, which is a different project that I've been involved in, but I just wanted to flag it. It's some work that I recently finished looking at how to centre energy vulnerable clients in the design of energy efficiency schemes, because as we know, a lot of retrofit schemes are often done to people without really being not with people, or they're not very people centered. So I sort of did a bit of work around this, created a toolkit, and if you're interested in that, have a look at this link, and I'm sure we'll share the presentation after. But I want to flag that because I think it's potentially useful to some of you. So that's me. I'll stop sharing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anika. That was a really good overview of the work that you've been doing, and you've really answered the remit that I gave you well. And also some of the things that you have raised in that are totally pertinent to things that Fraser brought up. One of my questions is going to be around paying people for their time. You know, we expect people to turn up for all sorts of events, and it's staffed by consultants who are all being paid to be there, and we expect the community to do it for free when their time is often very pressured. So thank you very much for that, Anika. Now, I understand that Sally, you're back in the room with us, I understand.
I'm here. Yeah.
Thank you, Sally. So, as many of you will be aware, COP26 is taking place in Glasgow in November, and in the run to that, Scotland having some beacon events. So it's really sort of the pathway to COP26. And all the beacon events across Scotland involve a range of partners from quite large institutions and organisations, and all of them also involve community organisations. And it would have been easy for us to go to some of the big organisations to say, yes, what are you doing on this? And they could come and tell us something shiny and new. But we wanted to kind of get the experience of the community projects that are part of that. And at the point that we invited Sally to come and speak, it had just been announced that the Climate Beacons, who the successful applicants for the funding for that were, and it's still very early days. And so we invited Sally to come along today just to say what she expected maybe from the Inverclyde Beacon project, and maybe some highlights from the partners. But it's basically just a taster for what the Beacon project could and will look like in the run up to COP26. And then we'll have a Q&A, and we'll have some wider discussion around what climate means in this context. Sally, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to speak to you briefly today, basically, about our project. I'm obviously Sally, and I work for Belville Community Garden Trust. And this is part of the Inverclyde Climate Beacon. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project, who we've got involved, some of the wonderful things that we've got planned. and I'm going to tell you a little bit about our community and the connections and the grassroots approach, which is really the driving force behind our actions and our behaviours. And what's also relevant to this situation, though, is some of the particulars of Inverclyde as a community and the issues that we face, which you can see repeated in communities across Scotland. So our partnership is the Belville Community Garden Trust, which is myself. And we also have the Beacon Arts Centre, which is our fabulous local theatre venue, and they are also our lead organisation on the project. We've got Rig Arts involved, which is an award-winning arts charity in the area. We've got the Inverclyde Shed, who again, charity, and they provide resources and workspace for social and mentoring purposes. We've got Mind Mosaic, another charity who runs subsidised therapy sessions for the community. We've got CVS Inverclyde, we've got Inverclyde Libraries, and we have the lovely Ian Parsons, who's a conservation architect, and the equally lovely and very helpful Bruce Newlands, who is also an architect and an energy assessor. And we represent quite a wide swathe of the community. We've got a fairly diverse focus. We've all got connections throughout the area. And as pointed out, we are mostly from a grassroots position. And therefore, really, we are the community that we're kind of representing, if you will. So our Inverclyde Climate Beacon project is about raising awareness. It's about creating an understanding of the future that we're facing, particularly within Inverclyde, and the wider sort of effects. We want to convey the message to people that you don't need to be perfect. This is about lots and lots of people making small changes, and it's not about an individual overhauling their entire lifestyle. And we also want to give people a wee bit of a say in what happens next and how we act. And there's a lot of interaction planned to get that involvement. So just for a little context, we are a really unique community. And obviously I say that because I live here and everyone likes to think that they live in a unique area. But we have arguably some of the most beautiful scenery in the world. We're right down on the River Clyde. And compared to that, we have also some of the highest levels of poverty and deprivation in Scotland. I think we actually have the #1 spot. We sometimes, vie for it a little bit, but yeah, between all this, it is still one of the most wonderful places to live. It's an extremely close community, and it really is just a wonderful place to be. So moving on, just the activities that we are planning are designed to entertain people, to involve people, and to educate the community. And it would take me way too long to go through every single little thing that we're doing. So I'm just going to run through a couple of items, and then I'm going to highlight a couple of things that are just sort of making me a wee bit more excited than, So we're going to be holding nature wellbeing workshops. We'll be doing upcycling workshops. We're going to develop online content. We're going to be doing short films. We'll be hosting community meals. We've got a low carbon cafe that we're going to be running. We're going to be holding climate adaptation discussion sessions. And we've got some fantastic creative installations, a lot of art and sort of exhibitions planned. And a lot of this activity is actually tied into the existing culture that's in our community. So Rig Arts, part of their contribution is the View from the Moon, which is an exhibition that's going to celebrate a local artist, George Wiley, who's all very familiar to everybody in Inverclyde. We all sort of hold him in kind of high regard. And this is going to be a contemplation of the planet's future survival and what we might do to mitigate and adapt that. And their brief is allowing the public to interact in the climate discussion with playful seriousness, which is a phrase that I just love, and I think it really describes our campaign well. And this is also linked into an annual Galoshes Festival, which is a really well-known and well-attended event. And I just like how that's all kind of tied in and sort of really speaking to the community. And there's another element that I want to tell you all about, and I really would hope that everybody here goes out of their way to view this now that I'm telling you about it. So part of the Beacon Arts Centre, part of their contribution is the Beacon Young Company are going to be performing a piece that they have written themselves. It's called Gaia, the Foretold Storm. And this has been written from their own knowledge, their own perceptions, hopes and fears. And I was briefly, very marginally involved with its creation, so I have a huge sense of pride over it, but I take absolutely no credit for it. It was entirely these young people that did this fantastic presentation. It's an excellent piece of theatre. It's a fantastic communication tool. And it's just so important that everybody hears it. The youth have such an important, strong voice, and they're so smart, and we need to start listening to them. And I really, really hope that everybody here goes out their way to view it. The last one of our activities that I want to kind of bring out and highlight is something that I'm just personally really, really excited about, which is our hydro feasibility study. So it's a huge opportunity for the area, and it's going to be looking at the historic water supply for our town, which is demand has massively dropped since pre-war times. And we are going to be repurposing the existing infrastructure along with our natural topography, which very hilly, to develop clean energy. And I can't emphasize how fitting the nature of this project is, not only for the potential to develop new industry in the area where we desperately need an economic boost, but also we have existing flood conditions that will be worsened with climate change. And this is something that could actually improve that situation. I was just talking with the architect Ian Parsons yesterday about possibly doing further communications, community consultations in Belville, in our community garden. And he was telling me how much he welcomes and values the input of the project partners just to access the community, to create that engagement and the influence and to get the reach with people. And we're hopefully going to make a success of this project because of that. Now, all these things are basically geared towards motivating our community. So as everyone is aware, you know, the worst physical impact of climate change in Inverclyde will be much like the rest of Scotland. You know, we're going to be severely impacted by flooding events and extreme weather events. And really, this is issues that we're no strangers to. Obviously, it's going to get worse, but we have a coastal town with ageing infrastructure, and we frequently suffer from flooding situations. So we're under the threat already of business relocation and closure, and you know, further economic kind of impacts from that. And everybody also is aware that the socio-economic impacts of climate change, widening wealth gaps, food insecurities, public health, greater poverty levels, they're probably going to hit the marginalised and impoverished communities first and hardest, and Inverclyde's going to be no exception here. And much like happened with the COVID pandemic, we are in the least favourable position to be resilient to that, being the most deprived area in Scotland. Now, as far as getting the engagement and reach within our community, our existing audiences and partnership working has always been strong in Inverclyde. We are a close-knit community. We've faced many hardships over the years, and we're all very, very familiar with each other. We've worked together for years. However, when the pandemic hit, Inverclyde was dubbed the COVID capital of Scotland. We had, you know, the most cases, we had the highest impact, and it really was an emergency situation. And something really quite phenomenal happened, which happened in multiple locations across Scotland, was that everybody stepped up. Everybody that could help helped. And we almost immediately formed quite a strong and wide partnership as part of our third sector emergency response. And this kind of, I'm going to call it a collective hardship, has really strengthened our bonds as a community. And I think before we had engaged communities and we had partnership working, and now we have the ability to mobilise for action, which is something that we didn't have before. And I firmly believe that that experience has improved our adaptive capacity to climate change. We now have this potential, like I say, to mobilise. And now we're just focusing on getting the message out that the emergency is the climate. We're in a climate emergency. And this is what we're doing with this project. So while I would suggest our engagement tools are excellent ways of communicating and getting in touch with your community, but they're quite reflective of countrywide approaches. I wouldn't, say they're entirely innovative. It's the voice that we're speaking with. It's the grassroots organisations. We're standing here as part of our community. And when you speak as part of the community, you just have naturally a better understanding of the community, its priorities, its needs, and how it acts and how it thinks. And I'm going to stop talking, you'll be pleased to know, but I'm going to leave you with just a pleasantry from one of our partners, the Rig Arts. The lovely Karen Orr from Rig Arts was discussing this with myself and what we were going to be putting forward to you. And she just happened to tell me how proud she was when we were applying for this grant. How proud she was to be standing shoulder to shoulder with her community members and to be something that will make a difference. And that just kind of warmed my sort of pessimistic heart. So I wanted to leave you with that today. It's our sense of pride to be here as part of our community and taking part in this climate making project. So thank you. That's all from me. You'll be pleased to hear.
No, thank you very much, Sally. That was fantastic. And I think what you're talking about there carries on excellently from Fraser's opening remarks around the voice that is heard in this discussion. And it is the community voice, whether or not we say it's the working class voice, or whether or not we say it's the voices from communities that are experiencing deprivation. These are the voices that we need to hear more of in the discussion around climate, and a great taster for what the Beacon projects are going to look like. And we put a link in the chat to the list of all 7 Beacon projects. So they're culture-led awareness raising events across Scotland so that communities can be made more aware of the very large issues that we are facing across Scotland. Now, I'm going to slightly switch up the order of events just now. So just before because I think our polling is, maybe we should do that first before we do the Q&A, because I think I'm interested in the response to the poll, the polling. It might inform some of our discussion. So there's a couple of questions for people to answer here. First one is, the Scottish Government poised to enter an agreement with the Green Party? What's your general view of its actions and commitments towards climate change so far? That means the government as a whole. And if you scroll down, we're also asking, are you confident that your organisation understands the targets that are going to have to be met regarding the climate crisis? And we're also asking, some of the architecture and built environment organisations are campaigning to end demolition or to reduce demolition of buildings and looking at reusing all building stock we currently have. That has consequences for regeneration, because arguably in regeneration we've done a lot of demolition and to provide improved housing. Can that continue? And I think the fourth question we're asking, how confident are you that people most in need of having their living conditions improved have some control over what the improvements are and how they're delivered, which picks up on Anika's work. So a few more questions than we had earlier this morning. We're at 83%. Anyone, any final votes before we end the poll? 88%. Chris, if you want to end the poll now. So as you'll see, position of the government, 31% are saying commendable, 44% are saying don't go far enough. No one is saying there are more urgent priorities. 25%, it's too early to judge. As regards how confident are you about your own organisation, very reasonably is 34%, but doubtful 38% is the highest, which is interesting. And understandably, it's not a priority for 3%. It may be that for your organisation that isn't a priority of area of work for you, so that is also understandable. People are saying that some 53% are saying it's a balance between demolition and retrofit has to be found. I was going to just leave the first two, but I thought I'm going to have to give a third option, because I thought there will undoubtedly be a desire for a third way, and that is a reflection of what I would have anticipated the answer to be on the demolition versus maintaining what we have. And are you confident that people have some form of control over their improvements? 84% are doubtful. And I think that maybe comes back to Anika's comments about things being done to householders as well as communities, rather than having some form of control over that. Okay, thank you very much for that. So, opening questions to our three speakers from this morning. Who has a question for our speakers? If you raise your hand, either physically or the virtual hand, or put something in the question box. I'm not taking you, Fraser. I'm not taking a question from you, Fraser, because you're a panelist. The question, I suppose, the question I had, I suppose it's for all three of you, but it was something that was brought up. The question came up around Fraser's one, was that issue of, if we're trying to engage communities in this, how easy is it to find the funding to pay for their time, as Anika did at the living wage rate in the projects in Oldham? And how necessary do you think that is?
I could have a go. Were you asking that to Fraser?
I was asking all three of you.
Yeah, I think I can't comment on how easy it is to find the funding, because it really depends. I mean, we're a really established organisation that's got quite a lot of support around applying for funding. So yeah, I think it's easier for us than others. And I don't know, in the Scottish context, and it sounded like you were talking about people at the government getting behind funding communities more. So that's a good sign. I think that's really important. In terms of how necessary it is, I think if they're serious about actually involving, engaging everyone, I think it's essential, because volunteerism is a very, it's very much the kind of available if you've got the time and space for that, and you can't talk about energy justice and rely on volunteering. It's not really fair.
So Fraser, you've unmuted.
Yeah, following on, I think, Anika is the best person to speak to that. But with Glasgow Community Energy, we managed to get plenty funding for the physical side of stuff, for the solar panels that we put up. For a lot, we similarly managed to hire a community organizer as well, community engagement officer. But getting money for anything beyond that, we had to really draw on. We were drawing from sort of arts funding, academic funding, anything that we could to get money to people. So it was easier for us to get the large scale funding to establish the project than it was to get funding to pay people, which I think that's a massive, an indication of the sort of imbalance of priorities in itself. But we also, and we're fully aware of this, we also suffer with our main boards of directors. The people who started the community energy project are all volunteers. None of us have ever taken any money from that. And we are all from similar backgrounds. So whether that's like, most of us have degrees, there are local people there, people embedded in community organizations in the communities that we work in, but it doesn't go nearly far enough to bring other people into decision-making space within the organization. As much as we try to encourage it, and as much as we organize as a cooperative, sort of as a democratic outfit, getting people to come in and actively dedicate even a couple of hours a week to governing the project is difficult. It's difficult to get people not represented from the community if you don't have the space in the budget to pay them. So in Scotland, I think there's still, and maybe Sally's better to speak to community funding there, but we certainly found on the energy side of things, it was easier to get money for physical assets than it was for any kind of community work.
Okay, thanks, Fraser. That's interesting. Sally.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, Fraser. It's always easier to fund physical resources than it is to fund people. There is an imbalance there, but the whole idea of paying volunteers for their time is, to us, it happens here, but it happens as an anomaly. There's been a few occasions where we've had a community see consultation from another organisation come in, and they want to access our people, and they're prepared to make a payment to them for their time. And it really, you know, people are shocked and surprised and stunned, and some people feel like they can't take it. But that's kind of just, I think that's just a cultural change that will happen. But certainly it's not the way things are done down here. It should be. It's a fantastic idea. It's wonderful, but it's not how things happen here.
Okay, something for us to maybe think about now. We've got some hands up. Nikki Spence, you had your hand up first.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Ewan. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Nikki Spence from Clyde Gateway. We're an urban regeneration company covering parts of the East End of Glasgow and into neighbouring South Lanarkshire. Really interested in all the speakers today. Particularly, Anika, I was looking at some of the stuff that you had put up, and I think you had said something along the lines of that you're working through various consultations through workshops with the communities, and that you have 8 workshops. I appreciate this might not have happened yet, but you had mentioned you're looking at 3 scales and trying to engage people around about home, neighbourhood and borough. And I think that's highly commendable. And I'm trying to see how you're getting on with that and where people are most interested. In our experience, looking at it at a level of home or neighbourhood tends to become more natural to people, and they can engage because it's tangible. When we start to look at a wider area, in your instance, you've mentioned boroughs, how do we move to that, and how do we help people to engage and to prioritise that when we're talking about different communities? And I suppose if we put it into a Scottish context, thinking about something like the Clyde Mission, where it's going right down the length of the River Clyde, lots of different communities, lots of different priorities. How do we start to build up from what we know works at a very local level, or in the instance you've mentioned, in someone's own home, and then taking that sense of ownership, feeling in control and confident to speak about what matters, raising that to a neighbourhood level, and then beyond, in our instance, maybe across a much wider local authority area, or indeed at a Clyde Mission level. So I just thought it'd be interesting to find out your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Yeah, really interesting question. Yeah, so I think, as you've said, sort of at the home and neighbourhood level, it's really important. Well, one, it's really important because obviously how people experience energy, a lot of that is at home, and sort of valuing that expertise and talking at that level is important. And one of the engagement tools we've used is sort of printing out big maps of their areas and sort of asking them to put flags in different parts of it to sort of talk about, you know, other people that they think are important or places that they think are important, and kind of really getting a sense of their like understanding the area from their perspective. I can't actually answer the borough level question yet because I haven't been in that specific workshop where they've talked about that. So I feel sort of, yeah, I'm sorry that I can't answer that, but I could probably ask one of the other facilitators. We're sort of about a team of 6-7 people who are sort of running the project together. But I think it will be interesting because we've just recently, I think one of our challenges that are interesting is the data dashboard. We're starting to get some really interesting high level data about the local area, and it's kind of the translation of that kind of quite high level information in a really engaging way that makes sense to people in the workshops. And that's going to be our next challenge over the next couple of months, is how to be able to do that and translate that. And I feel like we should be able to do that. We've all got the kind of communication person skills, but it'll be interesting to see how that goes, and yeah, be able to feed that back in the tool. I think lots of these kind of struggles and how this works will be captured in the toolkit that we're going to share with others when that's produced. So if you look out for that sort of later in next year, hopefully that'll help.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Leslie.
And I think the sort of the wider, beyond the neighbourhood scale is definitely a more challenging area to get wider engagement. One of the questions that has come in before I take some of the other hands from Linda Houston, she's asked, what evidence have you gathered about the impact on bills and behaviour change required to enable new technologies to provide the stated community benefits? And then the eternal question of how easy has it been to find competent local contractors and suppliers? I imagine that's maybe more for Anika, but I don't know if you've got any comment on that, Fraser, as well, around the cost benefits and behaviour change.
Not specifically for, well, not from Glasgow Community Energy anyway, because we run on public buildings, so we run on schools and generate local benefit rather than household level. So yeah, sorry Anika, but I think you're probably up again on this.
Yeah, I can't actually answer the first question about impact of builds behaviours. I don't know quite exactly which new technology you're referring to, isn't it? Do you mean solar panels and things like that? So I'm not sure about that. But in terms of the second part, I have in another part of my job, so I've got various roles at Carbon Corp. I have been working to engage the supply chain for retrofit in Manchester. And yeah, I think one of the things that a mindset that we changed was that we don't necessarily, like, specialists are important, but actually a lot of retrofit work is building work, and actually it's about engaging local builders who people already know and trust in the area and working with them. And so that's kind of what we've been working on. I think the government strategy a lot has been to sort of do these quite big schemes where you've got large national scale contractors that kind of swoop in and do a whole load of external wall installation, and we're trying to shift that so it's very much at the local level. So then it's about, and in fact when the Green Homes Grant, at the beginning of the Green Homes Grant, when there was more enthusiasm about it, you know, a lot more normal builders did approach us and go, oh, that's interesting, actually, I'm thinking of getting involved. And we sort of run training programs. Obviously, with that collapsing and there being a loss of trust, that's difficult again. And also at the moment, with builders being basically crazy busy until next year, just with Brexit and the massive home improvement boom that's happening at the moment, it is a challenge finding builders who, because it's different and it's more risky. So obviously, if you've got work that you know you can do, that's what you're going to do. And I think that's going to be, it kind of needs to be tied in, that kind of local engagement approach with national policy that is going to be long lasting. We know that for 10 years there's going to be financial support to build retrofit, then, you know, builders will trust that. Anyway, I could go on about that for ages. I'll stop now.
Yeah, thank you very much. Now, the situation is not dissimilar in Scotland in terms of accessing tradesmen in this particular, at this point in time, for the reasons you've given. And Chris Cook, you had your hand up next. You've disappeared. And if you're otherwise occupied, we will move to.
No, I'm here. Sorry.
What's your question, Chris?
Apologies. Yeah, my interest, I'm a senior research fellow at UCL at the Institute for Strategy, Resilience and Security, but been living in Lithgow for 15 years. And one of the projects I put together was called the Lithgow Natural Grid, the aim of which was to make Lithgow independent in energy. And what we did, and it's really, I'm really hearing reflected back some of the work we did. We first mapped an area of central Lithgow. We had Strathclyde Uni and a bunch of academics sort of leading the charge. We mapped the central area. In terms of energy use, you know, so gas, electricity bills, identified hotspots, and then identified interventions that could be made, not just individually, but collectively. And we put together a project called Heat from the Street, cool name, which was about solar power taking waste heat out of the sewers, you know. But one of the key points was, Ewan, that it wasn't your conventional selling heat as a commodity model. The idea was to pay an energy dividend of energy credits and to address fuel poverty, not by bringing the bills down, but by giving people the means to pay. Now, for me, this is where it gets really interesting. And I've been working for a decade from a background in global markets. How can we come up with complementary means of financing the transition? COP is looking for them. They haven't got them. I do think they are possible to do. Debt and equity cause the problem. We don't realize this, but they cause the problem. So we can't use those tools, in my opinion, to resolve the problem. But there are means. I'm really interested in working, you know, rolling out now. I'm in the point of rolling out some proof of concept projects. We've set up a small, it's called island-power.net. If you're interested in smart acceleration of community development is what we're doing. And we're really going for it at the moment, working with some very interesting people, Ewan. I mean, I worked with Andy Milne for a decade or more, you know, so he's probably warned you about me.
No, I recognize you, Chris, from other events.
Well, there we go. But coming to the point, I mean, I believe that there is an opportunity for each community to create what I call an energy treasury. Point and Sandwick Trust in Stornoway, fantastic, example, where a private sector wind turbine project was giving 54 grand a year to the local community. They're actually coming up with 900,000 and 2 million when the debt's paid off. Now, it's obscene. I'm on a rant. It's obscene how much profit is being hoovered out of Scotland by developers when it could actually be reinvested in the communities and literally become an energy treasury, because you're taking £50 notes out of the fresh air. That's what you're doing, and it's there to do, guys. It's there to do,
Thanks very much, Chris. I think if you want to put a link in the chat to the project that you talked about that you're about to launch, that would be interesting. And I think most of the audience would agree with you that around the ownership of who's generating energy is a systemic problem that needs grappled with. And maybe our new partnership government will maybe do that, or maybe that's caveated as one of the things that they're not allowed to talk about. Callum McLean, you had a question.
Thanks, Ewan. I think there's been a lot of really interesting comments made in the discussion. I'm particularly interested in Anika Kelly's experience down in Manchester, because I think that is going to be particularly relevant. In terms of my background, I'm an architect dealing with historic buildings, dealing with retrofit. So I'm kind of in the trenches trying to deliver many of these programs rather than at the policy side of things. And there is a real challenge, which I feel a little like Cassandra at the moment, but I don't think anybody's really got a grasp on the scale of the challenge that's ahead of us. It is absolutely colossal, not just in terms of finance, but in terms of resource and in terms of people who can actually deliver it. Anika, you touched on it briefly in your answer to one of the questions. But who is going to deliver it and how is it going to be delivered is a question that nobody is grappling with. Everybody's grappling with the policy equations and the targets and everything like that, all the sexy stuff. But the really down and dirty stuff in terms of how you deliver it hasn't really been grasped yet. And I think we're walking into a cliff edge if we're not careful. So two issues are going to arise. One is I'm not convinced. I mean, we talk about behavior change at community level, but I think there needs to be behavior change at government level, because I can't see how the free market is possibly going to deliver this. The idea that you come up with schemes and then you go out and tender them, and then you go through a process of selecting contractors is too chaotic to deliver this kind of program. And if we're talking about something being a climate crisis, you cannot deliver a program in a free market model. You have to take a much more wartime approach, where you actually kind of give direction to people and say, right, you're doing this, you're doing that, you're doing that, and you cut the market process out of it entirely. The other problem you're going to come up with, I think it's going to be a real problem for those who have more difficulty in engaging with community processes, is timescales. Because even when you look at things like the CARS programs, where they provide grants for upgrading existing buildings, what you tend to find is that they rely on the property owners who don't have a lot of experience in the construction field, bringing these projects forward and then coming back to the grant organising bodies with proposals which they'll consider and possibly fund, and then they have to go off and deliver it themselves. And inevitably, because they don't have the skills in that process, it takes time. And these projects, so you have a 5-year CARS programme which is funded, but the first 3 or 4 years is taken up just by community groups just trying to grapple with how do I go about it? And then all of a sudden in the final year, you get a flood of applications coming in for funding from people who finally got all the jigsaw pieces together, which means that it puts the funders under pressure, and it also puts the contractors under pressure, because they've been sitting around for 4 years waiting for work. And then all of a sudden in year 5, they get absolutely flooded with applications for work, and the resources are far too stretched to deliver it. And just a final comment is that I've been involved in the Climate Assembly in Scotland for 6 months, which has really been an interesting model in terms of community engagement and how you get voices from different parts of the community to get involved. But even there, we were stuck with pressures of time. Time was always becoming a constraint. And inevitably what happens is difficult questions become a problem. So they just kind of sweep it under the carpet and they just say, right, okay, we've got a general consensus that this is a direction we're going to go in, and we don't have time to deal with this particularly difficult problem. And it's the difficult problems that are the bits of the community that are really, really important. And we need to kind of come at it from the other way around in terms of what are the most difficult problems and deal with those first. And we leave the easy problems to the end because we can address those. So I've got more.
Callum, there's a lot in that.
There is, yeah. I'll leave it there.
The one question that I would actually take from what Callum has said is, I suppose, actually looking back, one of the things that I've just pulled up and I just lost from my screen because it's hidden by other things, was last year we asked the audience a question about which particular area of society needs to change the most to reduce the threat of climate change. And 6 to 8% of the audience chose national and local government, businesses, banks, and investors, with consumers and voters receiving 26%. And that comes back to we're facing something massive. How do we work with communities to give them agency in the face of a colossal threat without making them feel disempowered? I suppose Callum's also talking about the time it can take to deliver some of those things also being a barrier, but the time is needed if you want the community engaged. So how do you bridge the gap between the massive global threat that we face and the local changes we need to make? What one thing would you say can make that easier in talking to communities about that? Fraser or Anika? Sally has left, I'm afraid, so it's just down to you two.
Yeah, nice, easy little question to come in on. Okay, so I think what Callum's talking about is important, and I think the action of it, the nuts and bolts, it's something that we've been talking about COP not being a focal point. COP also needs to not be like where we just set targets and then do nothing. It has to be hashing out how you go about doing things. In terms of bridging that gap, and this is maybe, I don't want to go on a big political diktat here and take up the rest of the session. But I think what you mentioned, Ewan, in terms of the poll is that we separate who has to act into government, big business, etc. Absolutely. And we then pull individuals and communities into the sort of consumer pocket. And I don't think that's right. I think when you do that, you completely disconnect, not that there's no place for that, but you completely disconnect the role that community groups can have on the ground in terms of building networks, solidarity, capacity building, and the wider impact that can have in terms of political accountability and demand for different kinds of action. So we talk about individual behavior, consumer behavior as, okay, well, that can change demand for different services. It can change economic demand. It can change the kind of things that big business is likely to offer. But actually, if you're doing work at a community level, you're building not just capacity for energy projects or for low carbon projects, you're building solidarity, you're building interest, you're building networks quite holistically capable of demanding and shouting for better. You're altering. Now, it's a lot of this is going to sound fluffy, right? It's going to sound like, okay, it's hearts and minds. But that's a big part of it. So not thinking about people as I'm in my house buying different things or using different stuff, but thinking about people as sort of one having agency, but within the collective as well, thinking about the social and the political side of things as you go about your work, as well as the consumer, the CO2, the tons and the kilowatt hours. So I think there's a little bit in terms of the tack that we take when we talk about who's responsible for what, and trying to marry those things a little more closely together. I can see Anika's got a.
Okay, thanks, Anika. Final point from you, Anika.
I don't think I'm going to answer your question, Ewan, but there was something Callum said that I wanted to answer. So yeah, in a way, the kind of wartime approach of like, let's just retrofit all these houses has been happening in social housing, right? And there's probably a lot to learn there about, has it actually worked or not? Has it actually reduced carbon emissions or not? And how people are involved in that or not? And I think a lot of, I'm not saying that's a wrong approach, but what I am saying is that people have to be valued at the center of that. If we do go down the wartime approach, thing, or maybe not watertight, but kind of like, housing action areas like they did in the 70s, or it was like, in Manchester it happened a lot. You have to renovate this area, we're going to square off this bit of thing, we're going to get contractors to do it. But like, if you don't put people at the center of it, that isn't just a fluffy thing, it won't actually work. There's sort of the performance gap so that's kind of how well the retrofit performs to how much it was expected to perform. Often you fall short, and that's because people are central to homes, and how they live in them, how they use energy in them will dictate how much carbon emissions will be saved. And so if you forget people in your process and you just whack insulation on, you're not actually going to get the carbon emissions reductions that you needed, because someone might just whack the window open or not quite know how to use the heat pump or all sorts of things. So yeah, I think you're right. I'm not sure the free market approach is going to work. And I know that at Carbon Cult, we're trying to act in that area and make things work in that area through various projects that we're doing. But, if we do go down the other route, then, people have to be central to how that's done, I think. And that's the bit that often gets undervalued and not funded and not focused on.
Thank you very much, Anika. Some interesting debate to be had there, which we'll no doubt carry on. So thank you very much to our speaker, Sally, who has had to leave to deal with a local issue outside her office, to Anika from Carbon Co-op, and Fraser Stewart in a personal capacity, giving the voice to the working class in this debate, not debate in this agenda that is imperative. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Emma, who is going to introduce our closing speaker for the morning.
Thanks, Ewan. It's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Jo Gilbert. She is a spoken word artist and writer from Aberdeen, and she writes in both English and her native Doric. But I think today she's going to give us some traditional Scots. She's had a number of poems and short stories published, so give her a Google, or other search engines are available after this conference, and take a look at some of her work. Her latest commission for Aberdeen Art Gallery will see 3 poems become part of their permanent collection. And we are delighted that Jo has agreed to sum up our 3 conference sessions with a specially commissioned piece for surf, which you'll be lucky enough to hear for the first time today. So over to you, Jo.
Thank you, Emma. And thank you to all the speakers over the course of the 3 days. It's been really interesting, like hearing everybody, and so I was kind of jotting down notes and things, as I'm kind of also from working class background, and when I kind of went back into education later on in life, and I discovered poets like Tom Leonard and Billy Letford, I was like, hold on a minute, so I can write the way that I speak. And that was just such a revelation to me, because there were only very close spaces in which it was permissible to speak my own native tongue. And it just kind of made me wonder how many other folk that maybe wanted to, say something, didn't think they could because their voice isn't considered important enough because of the way that they speak. So that's kind of one of the reasons that I incorporate Doric and Scots into my work a lot. So I hope you like the poem I've come up with. It's longer than I thought, because you kind of speak about this without speaking about lockdown, because there was like obviously a lot of talk, especially in the first day, about how things had affected people and communities. And so I've kind of done a summary of that, and also a little summary of the 3 days, some of the subjects it's been discussed. There's been a lot. So it's a wee bit longer than I thought I would make. But I hope you like it. And if you need any translations, just give me a shout. It's called Gathering. Here's us gathering amidst all this. Nobody thought it'd ging on for as long as it is. 3 weeks max, we said. And now there's smiles and dry laughs looking back. Some had to modify as their worlds contracted to 4 was and a daily whack. We'd to rapidly learn new skills, sketch ideas for scratch around limits we'd never imagined. Some had to carry on as afore, hudding the rest of us up. Virtual spaces mushroomed for nayway as we frenzied to cater for Aberdeen, including those excluded for the digital world through age and poverty. And we all went on this journey, whether we liked it or nay. Same destination, different roads. And some of us had better modes of transport than others. Our horns and hearts didn't abide locked down with our physical selves. We turned to local areas and creative pursuits to see us through. Waves of volunteers for the healings to the lallans rallied round to try and make sure nobody went without. Communities assemble! No person left alone. Let's look after our ain for a change. Keep an eye on your neighbours. Ask if they're needing anything. Isolation rarely incited inspiration, yet we transformed houses to home offices, dinner tables to desks, bedrooms to makeshift boardrooms. Silent mouths move in wee boxes on Zoom until a surge of shouts erupt for your speakers. You're still on mute, and feeling like a recht dafty when it's you. But seriously, a smile is a win when you're feeling like greeting, and we all needed a lift. Summer brought her lifting, and we heartily welcomed a bit more freedom. Life seemed to open up with summer blooms, some chills brave enough to ging away, some a bit more cautious, thinking mere lockdowns loomed, hiding ahin a bonny blue sky. And when winter bit in, we all felt her call, started unraveling like twine on her strain, twisting, twirling, snapping back into restrictions, thinking, oh, nay again. But we all kept going, kept gathering. Even when gone was a simple act, getting out of your jammies, nae just your top half, or pushing yourself to ging out for a walk. Ony achievement was nae sma ava. And in this gathering, we're all heading in the same direction, towards changing. And the strides we've made are staggering, yet there's always more to do. Say money, priorities to pay attention to, people, place, partnerships, planet. Climate crisis, emergency stats in every area of varying degrees. We all see it, and we'll nae hae a future if we dinna address it. Over these 3 days, we've heard fae the policy makers, the money gears, and the grafters on the ground making nothing happen. We've heard how swerving around challenges and parameters in place to protect can sometimes be barriers to getting ahead. And FAS accountable can be a murky path. Local, regional and national often battle, the buck gets passed from pillar to post, but a one-size-fits-everybody approach doesn't exist. But partnerships and listening are keys to solutions of problems existing on to-do lists for way too long. We vice cause to the gatekeepers for trust, that local folk can fit the need instead of being told or us assuming we do. And it's easy to get frustrated, tired of burling round in circles when some answers seem so obvious, less speaking, more doing. We've a plan, so let's gang and take action. A difference is never made by biding the same or nae being willing to be a part of the change. Yet, some solutions are nae so simple, still stuck in spaghetti junctions, complex communities with complicated needs, multiplied by so many factors it makes my head spin just thinking about it, never mind living in it or working in the full swing of it. But we keep going, edging forward, or in gear, belting up braes, constructing bridges, building inroads we can be proud of, chipping away at the mountain of work still to be done, nae daunted by the sheer volume. And when we ask, what do you need? Answers are rooted in our communities. and we can see the impact that can hae. It spurs us to kick mair dents in adversity, level up the playing field for sae money. So keep gathering fun you need to. Share our learning and our mistakes. Forge a route that gives abody a chance to say fit they think. And the same opportunities to live. No matter far we are, far we're fae, far we bide, or how we speak.
Thank you so much, Jo. That was absolutely amazing and far beyond what I thought it would be. And I don't think that it just summed up beautifully what we've heard over the past few days, but what everyone has felt over the past 18 months. And I can certainly say I've definitely been that dafty that's still been on mute and been told you're still on mute. That is quite often me, even after 18 months. So just before I pass back to Ewan to kind of sum up today's event and the last couple of days, I'm just going to quickly, shamelessly do some adverts for some of other Surf's area of work. So I'll just quickly share my screen. So just firstly, is the Surf Awards, which is an annual awards process that we run nationally each year in partnership with the Scottish Government. Quite systematically, the image this year is a bear. And that feeling of hibernation and coming out of hibernation, much to as bears do to a changing world every year. And obviously with the impacts of climate change, that continues to change. So the deadline is a week on Monday at 5 p.m. on Monday the 6th of September. There are 5 categories which are on the screen there. We're hoping we get some good climate projects in there, as well as the usual kind of youth employability and place-based projects. So if you've got any questions on the awards, you can drop me an email, or there's some information, including the applications, which are quite short to fill out on the Surf website there. We are hoping to be back in a room, which feels ironic just now as we sit in our Zoom room, for the awards dinner at the end of the year in December. So fingers crossed for that. And just secondly, quickly on Surf membership, if you're not already a member, it's £50 for organisations and £20 for community groups and individuals. It's a free way to promote your activities to our network. You get involved in some of our consultations, like the manifesto that was mentioned earlier, and you get some advanced information on Surf's activities and priority booking for some of our events. There's information on the Surf website at Join Surf, but you can also drop me an email, or after this I will send a link to the recording of today and also some information on the awards and membership. And just lastly, as part of your pack, I sent evaluation forms for today. They were just kind of short things. If you could just mark down some scores and email them back to me at emma@surf.scot, that'd be greatly appreciated for shaping some of our future events. And I'll just pass back to Ewan.
Thank you very much, Emma. I don't think I can sum up the conference, because I think, Jo, you have totally trumped anything that I could possibly say. That was a really, really beautiful poem. I had my doubts about whether or not we'd be able to sum up a 3-day conference in poetry, but you have managed it. It was beautiful. You caught the tenor of it, the fact that we need to move to action and out of words, and the fact that responsibility lies a number of layers, from the home, the neighbourhood, and the borough, I suppose, as Anika talked about. So thank you very much, Jo, and I hope we will be able to, Chris, to slice that recording separately from everything else, so that we can just have the recording of the poem and use that separately. It needs to be seen in context, but it deserves its own platform too. So it just leaves me to thank everyone that's contributed to the 3-day conference, but particularly today to Fraser, Anika, Jo and Sally, who contributed as speakers, and to the audience that has also joined us across the last 3 days. It's 12:30, the sun isn't shining in Edinburgh, but I'm sure we can all go out and do something nice for lunch. Have a good day. Thank you.